He is extraordinarily bright and talented. He is the man behind SingularityU Canada, and I've learned a great deal from this individual. And so I'm thrilled to bring to the stage my dear friend and the CEO of Singularity University, Oren Berkovich.
Good job, man. Welcome, everyone. I am so excited to be with all of you today and talk a little bit about talent in exponential times. And starting with the most basic question, what does that actually mean? Is this about having access to the top AI researchers or the most promising engineers out of university? Is this about having the fastest coders in your team? I argue it's none of those things. Actually, that's not true. It'll be great having those people in your team, for sure. However, if there is one thing that is actually more important, is that you and your team will have a better ability to imagine, not predict, but imagine the future. Let me show you what I mean.
Imagine, if you will, sitting down to your morning coffee, turning on your home computer to read the day's newspaper. Well, it's not as far-fetched as it may seem. In fact, both local San Francisco papers are investing a lot of money to try and get a service just like that started. Science editor Steve Newman reports on one person already using the brand new system.
Quite fascinating, huh? Imagine this brand new system. So you're going to get these slides afterwards. My last slide will have a link, and you can download it. And I really encourage all of you to watch this entire piece that Steve Newman did. This was back in 1982 or so. And when you do it, when I watched it, I had two observations. The first one is, look at her face. She doesn't actually believe that this thing is going to work, right? And then, you know, she talks about this guy that is already using this brand new system, the innovator, the scientist. You know what his claim to fame was? Well, I'm going to tell you. Meet Richard. He owns a home computer. This is what this guy is famous for. And you can see the confused look he has on his face and this giant thing in the background. So it's fascinating to watch. He has to pick up this dial phone and connect all these cables, and it takes a long time, and then eventually you see a little bit of text in this machine in the back. So Steve Newman spent half a day with him and reported back on his observations, and this is what they found.
Well, it takes over 2 hours to receive the entire text of the newspaper over the phone, and with an hourly use charge of $5, the new telepaper won't be much competition for the 20-cent street edition.
Of course, right? It's not going to be much competition, and we all know how this story ends. But if there is one key takeaway from watching it, is that you and me and all of us, to some extent, we are all this reporter. We're all projecting into the future based on what we've seen so far and what we see today in the present. And I'm here to argue that this is no longer a sustainable strategy, because change, in fact, is accelerating. So if you're standing here and you're projecting into the future, think about all the technologies you heard about or you heard the headlines about or you heard about this week at Elevate. Blockchain, synthetic biology, 3D printing, autonomous vehicles, robotics, you name it. You're automatically, intuitively thinking about what you've seen so far, and you're projecting how probable, what is the preferable future, all these different scenarios, and how long it's going to take us to get there. Well, a lot of the work we do at SU is actually not trying to predict that, but allow leaders and individuals and governments and companies to expand the scope of what they think is possible. Because sometimes it's much wider than what we intuitively imagine. So I want to welcome all of you to your possible future, because the future is contingent. It depends on our action. We truly believe that this is a unique point in time, really an intersection between opportunity and capability. And it's our actions today that will dictate the role that you individually or your company or our community or our country is going to get to play in this future. So how did we get here? Why is this such a unique point in time? Well, not surprisingly, it starts with this chip, the computer chip. I want to spend a few minutes kind of walking you through how we got here. And it's not just the fact that we have these super powerful chips. It's actually the way we develop them and how they get developed. So every so often, we manage to double their power and shrink their size. So they get smaller and smaller. As they get smaller, we put them closer to one another, which makes them even smaller, more powerful, and cheaper. And this cycle continues. It's pretty tripping, huh? It continues, and this is really what drives a lot of this change. But it's not just the fact that computers are getting faster and cheaper and smaller. It's the fact that as they get smaller and cheaper and faster, we start putting them on more things. And all of a sudden, we're seeing something that is very, very different than what we've seen before. And then it's this amazing convergence of technology. So it's not just computers anymore or your smartphone. It's the fact that when computers get smaller and we put them on everything, we generate a ton of data. And now storage is getting cheaper. Bandwidth is getting better, so we can put it on the cloud. All of a sudden, we have massive data sets that allow us to do computational things with human DNA and other things that are impacting industries that have nothing to do with computers, but are benefiting from this convergence of technology. And you've seen this graph probably. There's 100 other examples beyond genome sequencing or internet users. We all heard that there's going to be trillions of devices connected to the Internet of Things by this year or that year. A lot of these graphs are showing the same pattern, exponential, because we're starting getting momentum, and all of a sudden, as things converge, we're seeing this amazing takeoff at the end. But that's really the key thing here. So I want to focus on what happens in this unique point in time, because understanding how this dynamic works is going to help all of us as leaders to better imagine the future, not predict it. So this is one of the frameworks we use at SU. It's called the 6D. You heard Peter Diamandis before. He came up with this, and we use it a lot to demonstrate how these dynamics work. It starts when things become digital. Think about the newspaper. Think about film. Think about your DNA, whatever it is. When something becomes ones and zeros, something fundamentally different starts to happen. All of a sudden, we can copy it. We can aggregate it. We can run different calculations on it. It really takes us from something that is materialistic and scarce to something that, to some extent, is abundant. And that's really the beginning of that trend. The next point is deceptive. That's that reporter. That's all of us. It doesn't work so well at first. And looks like we've got a mixed audience here, so this will be interesting. Who here had Netflix 10 years ago? Netflix online, they just started streaming. Can you show me your hands? Way up high. There's 6 people here. I think we're full house. This is about 400 people. 6 out of 400 had Netflix when they just started streaming. It didn't work so well. None of us had all the smartphones and the bandwidth. We had to wait for these DVDs to be received in the mail. Who here has Netflix now? Show of hands. All of us, right? This is why this next point is disruptive. As things become better, as we have breakthroughs that are coming from unexpected places, completely other technologies unrelated to the media industry, all of a sudden, it becomes disruptive. More people use it, and as more people use it, it gets better and better. So we don't have a lot of time to talk about what's coming next, but at SU, we really believe that this is kind of paving the road to abundance. So things become smaller. Computers that would take this entire space all of a sudden fit in our pocket and even get smaller. Makes it cheaper, and eventually democratizing it. So essentially, every day, think about it this way, every day, someone is dropping one of these, which used to be the technology that enabled us to land a man on the moon. Someone is dropping this to a toilet in a nightclub every day. This is actually democratizing technology because it costs less than $40, some versions. And all of a sudden, we all have access to this. So really, really interesting trends. But it's not just computers. And it's not just that it's getting cheaper. It actually creates completely new business models. So here is another example. Airbnb, another exponential technology. Who here stayed in Airbnb? Some of us? Great. I want to take you back 8 years ago. This is New Year's 2010. 6,000 people stayed in an Airbnb, effectively stayed at someone else's apartment. That's the last night of the year, time with family sometimes. How many people do you think stayed in an Airbnb 7 years later? 2017, one night, New Year's Eve. I want to hear some answers, come on. 1 million. 6 million. Any other from this side? 6 million. So you're already thinking exponentially. Well, it's 3 million people in one night. And talking about an exponential growth, you can see the perfect graph starting from 2010. This is 500 times in 7 years. Now, going back to the 6 Ds, the deceptive phase, if you're Hilton and it's 2010 and you see 6,000 people, it doesn't interest you so much. It's not even a decimal point. And again, the service didn't work so well. There wasn't a lot of listings and a lot of supply. So it's easy to discount it. But very quickly, not in a lot of time, it got to 3 million. And now it's probably double than that. In fact, why don't we put them right next to another? Hilton. A century in the making. This is a giant company. We all talk about unicorns that have a $1 billion in evaluation. They have a market cap of $25 billion. Almost 170,000 employees. It's a really, really big company. They took a century to build it. Airbnb, a decade, already in twice as many countries, only 3,000 employees or so, and a bigger hotelier in market cap than all the other ones. But the thing about exponential change and these new business models is actually a statistic that is not here yet. It's this one. 0 physical assets. They don't own any of the listings. In fact, they don't even own their office. They rented that too. So while Hilton have thousands of physical assets in their balance sheet, Airbnb has 0. So when you think about what that means, how do you actually fight a competitor that has no cost of supply? There is a very popular new neighborhood in San Francisco. Next day, you can have Airbnb listings there. Hotels can't do it. And obviously, it's not just the travel industry. All of you are representing many different industries, and I'm sure you realize that this is happening in yours too. There's a very purposeful choice of imagery here. All these companies are changing the way we live and work in an accelerating rate. So I want to take you back to this cone of uncertainty, this strategic foresight tool that we use. And as you think about it, and you start imagining today, we're going to take you through a few exercises. You're going to get exposed to some speakers and some big ideas. Let's all not get into this crisis of imagination. Let's not limit ourselves to all these scenarios and make sure that maybe there is this one scenario out there that you think is impossible. Maybe it's actually inevitable. Welcome and thank you all.